The ocean is a beautiful but dangerous place. You'd never know that if you've only sat on the sandy beaches or body surfed in waist-deep water. But one renegade current could sweep you out to sea in an instant. Crashing waves could cause your lungs to fill with water, dooming you to a watery grave. The most dangerous things, however, are what are just under the surface. The things that are watching and waiting for the right time to strike. I'm going to warn you right now to stay far away from the water in Massachusetts. I used to love going to the ocean. The smell of the ocean air was always refreshing, and I liked walking on the boardwalk and eating deep-fried, overpriced shellfish. However, since my first and last dive, I haven't gone anywhere near a body of water larger than a bathtub. I had just finished my scuba class a few weeks earlier, and it was time to do our final dive together. I arrived at the secluded beach in the North Shore to meet up with the rest of the class. I spotted Bob, my instructor, sitting by his pickup truck, and I made my way over. Bob is one of the most interesting people you'll ever meet. He's a rotund man, with gray, thinning hair, that never misses a chance to give you a sarcastic quip. He's your typical proud New Englander, but he's been diving these waters for 30 years, so there's no one else you'd want by your side. The rest of the class arrived shortly after, and we put on our diving gear. It was a cloudy and unusually cold June morning. Even so, I was eager to get into the water, because the wetsuit was causing me to sweat. The waves were choppy, and the overcast sky made the water a black, ominous color. They say that New England water is the toughest to dive, outside the Arctic Circle, and I can see why. Low visibility and low temperatures make for a difficult dive. We buckled our BCs and put our masks on, and waddled our way down to the shore, climbing over the rocks. Waves pummeled us as we attempted to put our fins on, but after a few hiccups and knockdowns, we dove and followed Bob. Visibility was only about 20 feet, and the water temperature was about 57 degrees, which was, according to Bob, like bath water. My frozen cheeks said otherwise. However, it was still an incredible feeling to actually be diving in the ocean. Months of training in a pool were becoming monotonous, and I was excited to finally be doing the real deal. Massachusetts is not known for its exotic ocean life, but there's still beauty in its murky water. In my little time down there, I saw cod and stripers, and the occasional lobster scurrying on the ocean floor. Its low temperature causes everything down there to almost seem suspended in time, only becoming disrupted as we swam by. We all performed our skills and passed with flying colors. After about a half hour of this, he gave us the thumbs up and we surfaced. Bob told us that for our final test, we had to navigate our own way back to shore underwater. We were about 70 yards away, so it didn't seem like an impossible task. The easiest way to do this is to use the position of the sun, but the overcast prevented that, so we had to navigate using the zones on the ocean floor: gravel, plant life, and sand. If we crossed from gravel to plants, or plants to sand, we were going towards the shore. I was nervous for this, but I felt that I had a good sense of direction. We all lined up, and he sent us off one by one. This was going to be the hardest test, but if we could do this, then we could do anything. If you've never been diving before, you might not know how hard it is to keep in a straight line while underwater. The current will slowly push you, and before you know it, you'll be facing a completely different direction. I had to rely on my own skills, because without visual confirmation, I wouldn't be able to communicate with anyone. Underwater, most noise is muffled, and the only sound is your regulator and the resulting bubbles. That's not even taking into account the thick hood I was wearing. Even if I were to get lost, no one would be able to help me. I was on my own. Protocol was to swim to the surface if you did get lost, but I was hoping not to have to resort to that. At this point, I just wanted to make it back to shore. My face was numb, and I only had a third of my tank left. I kept my eyes glued on the ocean floor, making sure I was still going the right way. I definitely didn't want to be the one guy who gets lost. My gauge read that I was about 25 feet down, and I guessed I was approximately 15 feet from the bottom, and I was still in the gravel section. I started to zone out when I noticed a shape below me. It was a dull pink color, and it was standing still. Against my better judgment, I went down further to investigate. I was curious to see what it could be. Even with such little visibility, I could tell something was just off about it. It hadn't moved, and I was sure I had been making enough noise to at least startle the creature. The pit in my stomach continued to grow as I continued my descent. I landed on my knees a few feet in front of it, and I was finally able to get a better look. I know that the creature's image will be burned into my brain until my dying day. It was almost as if someone had attempted to recreate a human from spare, rotted parts. The thing was at least 7 feet long and was a sickly pink color. It was covered in large patches of barnacles and warts. Its elongated arms ended with long skeletal fingers. Its legs were perpendicular to its torso, with its knees facing the surface, and its equally grotesque feet planted firmly on the ground. The worst part, however, was its face. It had 2 giant eyes that were pure white, no nose, and a big gaping maw filled with razor-sharp fangs that almost resembled rusty nails. It remained perfectly still, almost as if it were a statue. I slowly floated back, attempting to position myself to leave. It turned its face to me and let out an inhuman screech. Some animals are active hunters who stalk their prey in the cover of darkness and ambush them. Other predators wait patiently for the prey to foolishly approach them. With a sickening feeling, I knew I had fallen into this creature's trap. It scurried towards me, kicking up sand all around, as it desperately reached for me. I jerked my body to the left and evaded its grasp. Sand and gravel were being flung all around as it continued lurching at me. For a creature its size, it was surprisingly nimble. I launched myself up and began my ascent to the surface. Bubbles blocked my vision as I raced. My breathing was irregular and rapid, but I had to get out of there. I didn't care about decompression sickness. I just wanted to get to the surface, to the beach, anywhere away from that thing. I refused to look down at the creature. I had no idea if it was chasing me, but I didn't want to find out. My legs were burning and cramping. 15 feet. Keep kicking. 10 feet. Ignore the burning in your legs and arms. Kick harder. 5 feet. Almost there. Before I was able to breach the surface, a rough hand gripped around my ankle. I screamed into my regulator as I was dragged further and further away from salvation. I looked down and saw that the creature had a grip on me. Its face had a look of hunger on it as it used its legs to speed up our descent. I kicked with all my strength, desperately trying to escape its grasp. My arms were flailing, and I managed to knock my mask off, sending it tumbling down into the darkness. I was blinded and panicking. I continued kicking, but I knew at that moment I was going to die. I don't know why the creature loosened its grip. Maybe I kicked it in the face during my struggle. Luck was on my side, as its hand slipped from my ankle and grabbed my fin, which I was able to kick off. With one fin down, I kicked as quickly as I could, and finally reached the surface. I was only about 20 yards from shore, so I swam on the surface with my last bit of energy. I collapsed onto the beach, unzipping my wetsuit and ripping the hood off my head. With the regulator out of my mouth, I threw up. Bob came running over, asking what the hell happened. Everyone else had made it back to the beach, and they were about to send a party out to find me. I was still in shock, but I told him everything. Bob's face became pale as I told him the details. After I calmed down, he said it was probably a hallucination, and that I was never in danger. When I tried to argue, he told me to drop it. I tried my best to forget the incident. I attempted to rationalize it, saying that maybe it really was all in my head. Maybe it was nitrogen narcosis, but I wasn't even that deep. Like I said earlier, I avoid the beach now. There are things down there that we still have no idea about. The indigenous people of Australia have up to 75 different dialects, depending on the region where they come from. So the name of this thing could be something entirely different in another area. But my tribe calls it the Kardachi Man. Growing up in an outback town, you get a lot of freedom you take for granted. But that freedom could also get you into trouble. Big trouble. This occurred when I was about 11 years old in my hometown. My Aboriginal friend and I were walking around town, bored out of our brains during school holiday. The rest of our friends were out of town, so we decided to go fishing in a secret spot down by the old Aboriginal encampment, which was about 15 kilometers out of town. We headed over to the butcher to pick up some meat for yabbies, to his house for rods and traps, and then my house for food, drinks, and a shovel. We planned to dig for worms by the river. We got all the necessary supplies and headed out alongside the highway. We were walking and talking, and when we finally got there, we headed down the sand road and came across the fence that blocked off the sacred land. There was a statue of some sort on the boundary, and my mate stopped and said a few words. He said that his dad told him that he should always do that. Otherwise, the bad spirits could see us. I told him it was silly and I skipped it. We went down the back of the camp and walked on another kilometer or so and found our spot. All the noises of the bush were there, and there was a nice breeze blowing through. We could see the fish jumping and knew we were in for a good day. We started digging around for worms and came up with a few good ones and got to fishing. The day wore on, and it turns out that we are terrible fishermen with rods, so we abandon them and get into the water to catch with our hands. I am also terrible at that, but my mate ends up catching a decent-sized yellow belly, so we kept it for eating and showing off. We hadn't been paying attention to the time, and before we knew it, the sun had set. My friend starts to get really nervous, saying that it's time to get out of there. I ask why, and he says that it's really unsafe to be there after dark. I laugh, and at that exact moment, there's a huge splash in the water behind us. We both shit a little bit, but we check it out and can't see a thing. Just ripples in the water. Must have just been a big fish. We packed up our stuff and headed out. By the time we start our march back, it's pitch black. We can barely see our hands in front of us, and we forgot to pack a torch. So we kind of fumble our way through the bush until our eyes adjusted. We were walking for about 20 minutes when we stop. We can hear heavy footsteps off to our left, about 15 meters away. We strain our hearing, and the footsteps stop. We then realize that the bush is silent. No wind, no bugs, nothing. Our eyes have adjusted to the dark, so we can kind of see where we're going, and we realize we have overshot the road by about half a kilometer. And whatever was walking was between us and the road, so we decide to push on and come out along the highway. That was a mistake. The footsteps continued, sometimes closer and sometimes further away. I swear at times I could hear low mumbling. I kept telling my friend, but he told me to shut up and not to look back. It can't see us was what he kept saying, so we pushed on, feeling more and more uneasy. All of a sudden, we hear a loud crash come from our left, on the small animal trail we were on, and my mate grabs me and pulls me off into the scrub and tells me to lay down. As we're laying there, we see a silhouette loom up to the path. It kind of has the outline of feathers on it, and is ungodly tall and humanoid, but sickly thin. It's going from tree to tree not very far from us, and is looking all around, snapping its head, and making a low mumbling sound as it moves. It was looking for us. It suddenly stopped when we heard what could have been a kangaroo jump off into the bush. The thing let out a horrific scream that hurt our ears and shot off down the path. I looked at my mate and whispered to him if he had just seen what I had, but when I looked, he must have had his head in his hands the whole time. He answered, "We're not allowed to look." Tears fell down his cheeks, and then he whispered, "I told you he would see you if you looked. You could have gotten us killed." We waited for what felt like 2 hours, then bailed out of the bushes and ran the remaining distance to town, losing our fish and some other stuff along the way. We finally made it, and every time I brought it up to him, he told me to shut my mouth, or it would come back. So I did, and I haven't been able to sleep right since. When I came home from work, I was greeted by my perturbed mother. She said we needed to travel to the province to look after my cousin, Nina, as she was expecting. I found this odd, because the news of her pregnancy broke out about 5 months ago. Anyways, since family does come first, I decided to take a leave of absence from my office to stay there for 2 weeks. Now, before I continue, I guess it's important for me to give you a bit of context. I'm from the Philippines, and there, it's not weird to have your children staying over at your house, even when they're 30 and married. In my case, I'm only 24, so it's not that big of a deal. Another thing about our culture is that we value family so much. It might seem crazy to take a few weeks off of work to take care of a cousin to some people, but to us, it's very typical. No one will bat an eye. Soon enough, I saw the familiar hut where our Lola, meaning grandmother, shared the house with my mother's sister. I immediately went over to her. I took her hand and did the mano gesture. That's where you put their hand to your forehead. It's a sign of respect. She opened her mouth to speak. "You are wondering why you are here, I'm sure." I replied that I knew it was important to help with Nina while her husband was overseas. My Lola shook her head and said, "The cats are heavier at night." I just laughed and shrugged it off. I scolded her for trying to scare me. Her face never changed. It was resolute and somehow fearful. Before the sun went down, I saw Lola hanging some cloves of garlic on the windows. She threw salt at the base of the front door. It was at this time that I understood. She believed in the aswang. Aswangs are the Filipino version of vampires. It is rumored that they walk among us. They're usually beautiful women with fair complexion and long black hair. At night, their bodies will split. Their upper half will leave the lower half to search for food. And what do they eat? Innards, of course. But their favorite things to eat are the unborn. This was silly. I'm too old to believe in this shit. But to respect the traditions and my Lola's beliefs, I just ignored it. At around 8 p.m., while chatting, the conversation was cut short by my Lola. She was gesturing for us to be quiet. I heard the sound of flapping wings. Not that of a bird, but huge ones. There's a swoosh, as if a pterodactyl is just outside our house. She proceeded to close all the windows and inspected the ceiling for holes. Aswangs have really long, sharp tongues, and they use it for taking the things they want to eat from inside of you. Nobody really knows how they do it. Some say the tongue slices your belly open. Others think they pass it through the navel. Regardless, it leaves a bloody mess. The flapping sound started to fade away. Relief swept through me. It was leaving. I sighed. Then I noticed the 3 women I was with were more frantic and panicking. My mother gave me a machete. Grasping my hand firmly, she said, "Never leave Nina alone." They put Nina and I in her room, and she started to cry, her face contorted with fear. I tried comforting her, but she was inconsolable. She started hyperventilating. This was going to be bad for the baby. She needed a paper bag and some water. I got up and reached for the door. Nina's hand pulled me back. She begged me not to leave her. Her lips were starting to get pale, so I pried my hand away from her. I had to do something. While I looked for a paper bag, I saw our door wide open. My Lola and mother were gone. And then I heard a loud thud on the roof, and Nina started screaming. My Lola's words went through my head. The cats are heavier at night. I ran back to Nina's room. The thatching on the roof was clawed into by a very ugly creature. Its face was monstrous. Red eyes, wild black hair that went down to the bottom of its torn waist, sharp teeth, and from its mouth, a long, sharp tongue that was attacking Nina's tummy. She screamed in pain. Blood trickled down on her legs. The thing was flying above. I couldn't reach it. I threw the machete, and it hit it square on the forehead. It screeched in pain. It started circling our house. We could hear its wings and screeches for a while, but eventually it left. When I realized it was over, I made Nina lay down and got her a glass of water. Shortly after, my mother and Lola came back. Apparently, they went out to look for the other half of the body, to sprinkle it with salt and spices. The aswang would be unable to reattach itself. If the sun rises and it wasn't able to reattach, it burns and dies. We rushed Nina to the nearest hospital. We mourned as we received the bad news. She had lost the baby. I blamed myself. My mother's instructions were clear. I should have never left her alone. Nina and I barely spoke after that. My Lola understood. She was hurt, but she did understand. She knew I tried to do the right thing. Eventually, Nina decided to move to the city when her husband came back from overseas, and they're expecting again. As for me, I still jump at the sound of flapping wings and thuds on the roof. Hey guys and ladies, thanks for watching. If you want me to tell your story or read a creepypasta, email me at the address in the description. Be good to animals, even people. See ya. Hello?
Hey man, I need your help.
What's going on?
I'm down at the Moose Jaw and these guys are fucking with me. And there's like 3 of them.
Alright, let me hit some spinach and I'll be right there. Whoa!
47 minutes later.
Your ass. Hello?
Dude, what the hell?
What?
I got my ass kicked.
Why? What happened?
Remember, you were supposed to help me.
Oh, yeah. I thought I was forgetting something. Sorry, dude.
Ja, snämar, bärksbus, hrish.
Got my ass kicked. Did you say, dude, what the hell?
Yeah.
You did, yeah. Just sitting back there, huh? Just sitting down in the back.